Chapter 320. My plan to save Lu Chuanda was to use my incarnation to infiltrate the team of experts. I would find out the truth of this case and help Lu Chuanda get rid of his crime. However, I didn't expect that this case would become this big. There were two heavenly masters, and the last one was the Jing ghost. His power was terrifying. After thinking about it carefully, the original plan was actually successful. I had more or less figured out the truth of the matter. The problem now was that only I knew the truth of the matter. The other two people who knew the truth were already dead. Moreover, the police definitely wouldn't believe my one-sided story. Thus, I had to find a way to make other people believe in the truth. Then, I would use other people to convince the police. It wasn't hard to find a suitable candidate. It was Han Wennan. He was from the Han family in Mount Qinling, and he had prestige in the metaphysics society. Most importantly, he had shown me kindness in the cave that day. It wouldn't be too dangerous to contact him. However, the Han family's heavenly master had come that day. If he had stayed with his fourth uncle, I wouldn't have had a chance to approach him. Of course, besides him, there was also monk Miaojue. Although he didn't have a strong presence, he was still a member of the team. Moreover, contacting him would be much safer than contacting Han Wennan. After making up my mind, I got up and asked Xie Chenghua to watch the shop. Don't let anyone go upstairs. Then I left the shop. I had an idea, but if Han Wennan and monk Miaojue had left Shenzhen, it would be too late. I had to hurry. Moreover, this case wasn't only related to Lu Chuanda. It was related to the safety of the people in Shenzhen. I knew the Jing ghost's power well. If he got out of the cave, I didn't know how many people would suffer. Considering the fact that he had possessed Yu Fuda's body and killed many people, it wasn't something I was worried about. It was highly likely to happen. It wasn't hard to find information about Han Wennan and the others. After leaving the shop, I contacted Wang Yongjun and asked him to investigate the case. At the same time, I hailed a taxi and headed to the Municipal Public Security Bureau. Halfway there, Wang Yongjun sent me a message. The situation was completely different from what I had expected. I thought that since the heavenly master of the Han family was injured and the true dragon vein was involved, Han Wennan would go back. Moreover, Miaojue didn't want to fight for the true dragon vein because the case wasn't finished yet. As a member of the expert team, it was possible that he would stay in Shenzhen. However, the truth was that Miaojue had left, but Han Wennan was still in Shenzhen. Moreover, I wasn't unfamiliar with Han Wennan's residence. It was the hotel where I had gone to pick up Shi Mei. Yan Nantian, who had disguised himself as Professor Liang, was also a member of the expert team. At the same time, I gave Tong Tong the lightning tribulation talisman I had gotten from Qin Yangting to summon 3 bolts of heavenly lightning. I asked her to activate this talisman if the situation didn't look good. I didn't sleep for the whole night. I had to use all the power I had. I hoped that if the well ghost was lured out, I would be able to escape with my life. After everything was ready, the sky was bright. I quickly packed up and went to the Public Security Bureau. Since I was still using Zhang Wenli's identity, when I arrived at the Public Security Bureau, the people there recognized me. It seemed Han Wennan had also told them to take me to a car. They told me that Han Wennan was waiting for me at a military base in the back. When I saw Han Wennan, I was already at a military training base. Han Wennan was sitting in a helicopter. When he saw me, he called me. I dizzily boarded the helicopter. After the helicopter took off, I saw Han Wennan's smug face. I understood everything. This fellow had told me that the way to guarantee my safety was to take a helicopter. I had told him about the time Yan Nantian took me and Chen away. At that time, we were hovering in the air. The well ghost just glanced at us and let us go. There must be a reason behind it. Although Han Wenren didn't know it, it didn't stop him from making deductions. Chapter 321. Riding a helicopter was a new experience. However, I wasn't really excited. Quite the contrary, I felt restless. This feeling came without any reason. It was an instinct of a feng shui master. Moreover, the higher we flew, the more restless I felt. Fortunately, the height of the helicopter was no more than 100 meters, which was acceptable. While I was getting used to the helicopter, Han Wenren sat next to the pilot and told him what to pay attention to. While flying, he tried to fly straight up and down. I didn't need to ask to know that he was imitating the way Yen Nantian had taken us to escape. He wanted to use the shortest amount of time to escape from the well ghost's pursuit. After watching the pilot's operation for a while, I couldn't help but worry. The helicopter's vertical speed was too slow. It couldn't be compared to Yen Nantian's speed. Just by relying on this speed of ascension, wanting to escape from the Jing Gui's pursuit was really out of thin air. After Han Wenren finished talking to the driver, she returned to the back seat. I told her about my worries, but Han Wenren didn't seem worried at all. She waved her hand and said, "We can't do everything perfectly. This is the best we can do. When the time comes, just be careful and don't get too close to the cellar." I was confused. If we didn't get close to the cellar, how could we lure the well ghost out? I wanted to ask him, but the helicopter was really fast. At this moment, we were close to the orchard. Several helicopters appeared next to us. Deputy Chief Zhang of the Municipal Public Security Bureau was sitting on one of them. He was accompanied by a few people who looked like leaders. They waved at us from a distance. Under the loud noise of the helicopter's propellers, we couldn't hear their voices. Han Wenren and I waved at them. Then the helicopters arrived at the destination. When I saw the dark entrance to the cellar one more time, I felt more restless. When I recalled the terrifying well ghost, I had the urge to turn around and run away. Han Wenren, who was on the side, suddenly handed over something and asked me, "Do you know how to use a gun?" I lowered my head and saw that it was a 1-meter-long rifle. I didn't take it. Puzzled, I asked, "Why are you using this?" Han Wenren smiled. "The bullets in this gun are all specially made. There is a small spirit gathering array hidden inside the bullet. When the bullet is shot out, as long as you use your Dao Qi to instantly trigger the array, the bullet will carry a strong Dao Qi. It is very effective against ordinary ghosts, even against ghosts at the level of Ghost Marshal and Ghost King. It can also have a certain restraining effect." I was bewildered and looked at him helplessly. "Do you want to use this to deal with the well ghost?" Han Wenren shook his head. "Of course not. We're not here to deal with the well ghost today. We just need to lure it out." I gritted my teeth and looked down. However, the well ghost had disappeared. It was as if he had never appeared. I exhaled in relief and lifted my head to look. Han Wenren was lying on the ground with a dull face. His teeth were clenched, and his face was dark. His eyes weren't closed, but only the whites of his eyes could be seen. He didn't look too good. The pilot had just sat in the pilot's seat. He hadn't had time to control the helicopter yet. His 7 orifices were bleeding, and he leaned against the seat. He was dead. I hesitated for a while. I wanted to take off the jade bracelet and place it on Han Wenren's body to see if it would work. However, before I could do that, a small ball suddenly emerged from under Han Wenren's shirt. It spun crazily through his shirt. It even moved his shirt, twisting into a small ball. After half a minute, Han Wenren opened his mouth and vomited a mouthful of cold, dark blood. Then his eyes rolled back and closed. The dark color on his face eased a lot. After a while, he opened his tired eyes. At first, he looked at me in confusion. Then, he furrowed his brows and sat up. His face was still filled with fear. "Where's that thing?" he asked. I shook my head. It disappeared. I think it returned to the round well down there. Han Wunen exhaled and wiped the dark blood from the corner of his mouth. Then, he carefully turned his body and looked down. After confirming that the well ghost was gone, he closed the partition. He was dumbstruck for a long time. Then he said to me, "You're right. I'm afraid we'll need a few heavenly masters to subdue this thing. It's too scary. Too scary." He had always been a calm and tenacious man. If he could sigh with emotion, it was enough to prove how shocked he was right now. Yesterday, because he didn't trust me, I had only told him how scary the well ghost was. I didn't tell him about Yen Nanshan's speculation about the well ghost's origin. Now, it was time to strike the iron while it was hot. I told him Yen Nanshan's speculation. After listening to me, Han Wunan's face became more solemn. At this moment, he had seen how scary the well ghost was. Of course, he didn't doubt his speculation. As the son of the Han family, he understood what it meant to have the ghost of the Shang dynasty's sacrificial offering from the netherworld. After keeping silent for a long time, Han Wunen got up from the ground. He didn't say anything, but from his expression, I could tell that I had achieved my goal. After getting up, Han Wunen wanted to ask the helicopter pilot to take us down. However, the moment he opened his mouth, he found that the pilot was dead. Han Wunen sighed and moved the pilot's body to the back of the helicopter. Then, he sat down and operated the helicopter. After flying for a while, he slowly landed on the ground. Not long after we landed, many armed policemen and the leaders of the other helicopters gathered around. After taking the pilot's body away, Han Wunen stood with the leaders of the Municipal Public Security Bureau and discussed for a long time. Then, the leaders, led by Deputy Chief Zhang, turned around and left with solemn faces. They got into the police cars not far from us and drove away. I walked over and was about to say goodbye to Han Wunen. Suddenly, a car drove over. Han Wunen didn't wait for me to speak. He opened the car door and got in. He hesitated for a while, then said to me, "Our Han family can't give up on this true dragon vein. You know the situation down there better. Do you want to come and take a look?" I was bewildered. Then I reacted. After I had found the well ghost, I had forgotten about the true dragon vein. However, Han Wunen had learned Yen Nanshan's real identity and the fact that he had left us a long time ago. Now, he was interested in the true dragon vein. As a member of a metaphysical family, I could understand why he couldn't forget about the true dragon vein. However, the cave in the true dragon vein was connected to the well where the well ghost was. Wasn't he afraid of danger? I hesitated and asked. Han Wunen shook his head. "We've been here for a long time, but nothing happened. It proves that the well ghost won't come out of the well easily. As long as we don't go through the well, it won't be a big problem." "Don't go through the well? How can we get in there?" Han Wunen saw my doubt. He didn't wait for me to ask and explained. "Last night, I arranged for people to dig a new cave not far from the true dragon vein. It's almost done. We'll go there from there." I thought for a while. These 2 days, I had digested all the witchcraft energy I had absorbed last time. If I went down there again, I could absorb more. Perhaps I could break through to the 4-star knowledge level. I wasn't worried about my safety. If Han Wunen wanted to deal with me, he would have done it already. He wouldn't have waited until now. I nodded and agreed. Han Wunen and I got in the car. After driving for 4 or 5 kilometers, we arrived at a farmer's house near the orchard. This place was next to a small river, and there were 3 farmhouses scattered by the river. I guess the residents had moved away. In the yard that we entered, there was a large excavating equipment. Workers were busy working around it. After we entered, a middle-aged man came to report to Han Wennan. We've dug more than 20 meters and reached the hard rock. The workers are preparing to blast it. Han Wennan nodded and asked me to sit down and wait. Around 10 minutes later, there was a deep explosion. The last piece of rock was blasted open. Han Wennan stopped the workers who were about to go down to check. He went to check it himself. Then he whispered into the middle-aged supervisor's ear, asking him to dismiss all the workers. After everything was done, only the 2 of us were left. Han Wennan found 2 ropes and threw them into the hole. He went down first along the ropes. I immediately followed behind him, not long after entering the hole. We smoothly passed through the layer of rock that had been blasted open. When we reached the surface, we looked around. Han Wennan's calculation was correct. We were in the cave. We could still see some of the broken terracotta statues. Moreover, the aura of the true dragon's vein and the witch's aura were coming. We weren't far from there. Han Wennan grinned. He was in a good mood. He pointed to the front and said to me, "Let's go. We should check the true dragon's vein. This time, it's all thanks to Brother Zhou. After the Han family has completely taken over the true dragon's vein, we will definitely reward you." I bitterly smiled and shook my head. Right now, I'm a stray dog that everyone wants to beat up. I'm content to just live an ignoble existence. Forget about the reward. As long as Brother Han allows me to cultivate for 4 hours today, it will be enough. Han Wennan opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. In the end, he just nodded and said, "All right, let's go." After he finished speaking, he lifted his foot and was about to walk forward. But at this moment, there was suddenly a shocking wave of qi of the way behind us. Han Wennan and I both changed our expressions. There was actually someone lying in ambush here. The person who had ambushed us was extremely powerful. In a hurry, I had mobilized all of my witch's aura. However, I could only tilt my body to the side. Then I saw a white sword light that was wrapped in surging Dao Qi. It slashed at my side. Although the sword light didn't hurt me, the surging Dao Qi tore off a piece of flesh from my shoulder. My entire sleeve was also torn off, causing blood to gush out. Han Wennan wasn't much better off than me. His chest was bleeding profusely. Even his forehead was bleeding, causing his entire face to turn red. I suppressed the anger in my heart and turned around. When I lifted my head to look, I was stunned. Behind us, a bearded man in a white robe stood there. He held a white sword in his hand. There were still traces of blood on it. The person who had ambushed us was Zhang Canwen. "Is this really the ancestral land of your Wenshan lineage?" Zhang Canwen nodded. "This isn't only the ancestral land of our sect, but it's also the burial place of our sect's ancestors. This time, I came here with my master's ashes. I also wanted to take all the ancient copies of the Song of Righteousness away from here. I didn't expect that as soon as I came in, I would find that something was wrong. Then I heard an explosion from above, so I came here to ambush. My heart skipped a beat as I thought, this isn't good. If this was just the ancestral land, I could persuade Zhang Canwen, and he might agree to give up. However, this was the burial place of Wenshan lineage's ancestors. How could Zhang Canwen abandon his ancestors' remains and allow the Han family to take over this place? So what if he wasn't willing? He was the only descendant of Wenshan lineage, while I was a remnant of the witch tribe that everyone hated. Neither of us had the power to go against the Han family. After hesitating for a long time, I braced myself and said, "Brother Zhang, I know that this place is important to you, but the true dragon vein is too precious. The Han family definitely won't give it up. The metaphysical union won't give it up either. If you insist on protecting this place, I'm afraid." Unexpectedly, before I could finish, Zhang Kanwen sighed and interrupted me. "You don't need to tell me that. I just want to chase away Han Wennan and take away my master's and my ancestors' ashes. As for the other things, I don't have any extravagant hopes." I cheered up and told him, "You don't need to do that. I'm going to talk to Han Wennan. As long as it doesn't involve the ownership of the true dragon vein, he won't refuse." Zhang Kanwen sighed and didn't say anything else. He just nodded in silence, just as I had expected. After Han Wennan got to know Zhang Kanwen's idea, she also let out a long sigh and readily agreed to it. Then Zhang Kanwen returned to the big cave where the true dragon vein and the Tai Sui were. He collected old Zhao's ashes, which he had brought here today. Then he walked into the cave. "I want to go to the sacrificial altar to collect the other ancestors' remains." After listening to him, Han Wennan and I changed our countenances. We pulled him back and didn't let him go to the sacrificial altar. I told him about the well ghost. Hearing this news, Zhang Kanwen's expression also changed greatly, and he asked involuntarily, "That thing really came out?" "That thing?" I was bewildered. Before I could ask, Zhang Kanwen hurriedly explained, "There's a saying in my school. It's been passed down from generation to generation. It says that there's an ancient spirit imprisoned in that well. One day, it will break the barrier and come out. I always thought it was just a legend. I didn't expect it to be true." I thought for a while and understood. Different from Tao energy, shaman energy was absorbed really quickly. When I reached glory of knowledge, it only took a few minutes during the solar eclipse. Last time, when I broke through to glory of knowledge, it didn't take long either. Thus, after sitting under the feet of the Tai Sui's corpse for 10 minutes, I opened my eyes and got up. 3 stars and 4 stars of glorious consciousness are collectively known as glorious consciousness middle stage. The reason is that there is no boundary or difficulty between 3 stars and 4 stars. It is very easy to reach. So, after I stabilized my realm, I charged to glorious consciousness 4-star perfection in one go. As for breaking through to the 5-star glorious consciousness realm, I merely sat down and attempted a little before decisively giving up. Don't bite off more than you can chew, but this is the truth for both ordinary people and us cultivators. From a certain point of view, it is even more important for cultivators. Greed is the first original sin of cultivation. No matter when, we have to be cautious. Moreover, in just a few days, I am already very satisfied to reach glorious consciousness 4-star from glorious consciousness 1-star. My only regret is that when the people from the Han family come, I won't have a chance to come to this natural cultivation place that the Tai Sui's corpse had created. After I got up, I left the cave with Han Wennan and Zhang Kanwen. We walked along the cave towards the sacrificial altar. Along the way, I asked about the fatty. When I had asked Yang Kaichen to help me investigate, he had contacted Zhang Kanwen. At that time, Zhang Kanwen had coincidentally met the fatty. He had even taken a photo of the fatty and sent it over. At that time, I had only confirmed the fatty's safety. Now that I had met Zhang Kanwen, I naturally had to ask about it in detail. However, when I asked, Zhang Kanwen only shook his head at me and didn't say a word. Just as I was feeling confused, Han Wennan hurriedly explained to me, "Just now, when you were cultivating, Brother Zhang told me that he was going to seal spirit accumulation to deal with the ancient evil spirit." Seal spirit accumulation? I nodded. In Buddhism, there was a saying called silent Zen. Buddhists often said that opening one's mouth was a sin. It was similar to what ordinary people said. Misfortune comes from the mouth. Buddhists believed that those who kept their mouths shut would achieve the Buddhahood. There was even a monk with great virtue who said, "If you don't talk for 20 years, even the Buddha can't do anything to you." Although I didn't know what John Canwin meant by seal spirit accumulation, I guessed it was the same as the Buddhist silent Zen. I didn't talk anymore and walked in silence for around an hour. Eventually, I reached the stone room where the sacrificial altar was. As soon as I got there, I became tense. I carefully mobilized the Tao and shaman energy in my body and put my talismans and magic tools in a place where I could use them at any time. Although all my preparations would be useless if the Jing ghost attacked me, it was still a form of psychological comfort. Han Wen'an and I were similar. Their faces were solemn as they held the leaf-shaped magic tool and the small ball-shaped magic tool in their hands. However, Zhang Canwin was different from the two of us. His face was solemn, but his body was calm. He didn't prepare anything and just walked toward the round well. Instinctively, I wanted to call him and ask him to be careful. However, I didn't say anything. I just stood there and quietly watched him. After checking the well, Zhang Canwin turned around and waved at me, signaling me to go there. I was bewildered for a while, then braced myself and walked toward him. As soon as I took 2 steps forward, Han Wen'an hurried to follow me. She didn't say anything and just followed me to the well. Lifting his eyes to look at the round well, it was still the same as before. The well water was level with the edge of the well. The well water looked very clear, but there was only darkness at the bottom. Nothing could be seen. I looked at the altar next to the well. There were some dents on the ground. It was obvious that Han Wen'an and I had shot at it. However, there was no mark on the rim of the well. In theory, if so many bullets had hit the altar, there should be more on the rim of the well. I didn't know what material this well was made of, but it was so hard. Zhang Canwin didn't say anything. However, he raised his hand and gestured at me. I quickly recognized that he was gesturing in the shape of a pen. I thought for a while and understood. I took out the Yin Yang Yama brush and handed it to him. After receiving the Yama brush, Zhang Canwin gestured at Han Wen'an and me to move back a little. Then he straightened his clothes and bowed to the north. Afterward, he stood up and put the Yama brush in his hand into the well. After the tip of the brush was full, he placed it on the rim of the well and slowly wrote. I didn't move far away from the well. I craned my neck and saw that he had written one of Wen Tianxiang's poems on the rim of the well. This was the most famous line in Wen Tianxiang's poems. It was the first half of the last line of the poem crossing the ocean. Since ancient times, who hasn't died? After writing this line, Zhang Canwin stopped. He turned around and returned the Yin Yang Yama brush to me. Then he didn't hesitate anymore. He stooped and stirred the water in the well. As he stirred the water, a flow of Tao energy diffused from his body. Han Wen'an and I immediately understood that he was summoning the well ghost. His method was the same as what Han Wen'an and I had used to use the Tao energy bullets. The effect was just as good. After he had stirred the water around a dozen times, I suddenly felt a chill around me. I lifted my head and saw the shadow I had seen before. It was now above the round well. The last 2 times I had seen this shadow, I had been high up in the sky, so I couldn't see it clearly. This time, we were face to face. We were only 3 or 4 meters away from each other. I could finally see the appearance of this ancient, decaying, evil spirit. Perhaps it wasn't appropriate to describe him as a ghost. I could see his skin and flesh. However, his skin and flesh were like those of a mummy. They had dried and blackened, and most of them had fallen off. Only a small number of blackened, muscle fibers could be seen on his chest. They were intermittently connected to each other. Except for his chest, the rest of his body was shrouded in a black mist. His head was exactly the same as the last time I had seen him. The top of his skull was gone, and the top of his head was sunken. On his shriveled cheeks, two thick, black, shriveled muscles dangled from each side. The rest of his body was no different from a skeleton. In his big mouth, two neat rows of white teeth shone. They formed a strong contrast with the blackness of the rest of his body. On each of his teeth, there were inscriptions that looked like the oracle bone script. Those inscriptions were also white, but strangely, they were clear. At first glance, people couldn't help but sink into them. Besides that, the strangest thing about this ancient, evil spirit was his pair of eyes. Logically speaking, with his skull and brain completely gone, the uppermost part of his face should be the lower eye sockets and the bridge of his nose. In fact, that was indeed the case, but at the uppermost part of his head, there were two eyes floating in midair. To be more precise, they were two eyeballs. These two eyeballs weren't different from ordinary people. The pupils were in the middle of the white of the eyes. The center of the eyeball was dark, and the surroundings were slightly brown. They were floating in the air. Although they weren't connected to any muscle fibers, they could still move around. When he first appeared, he lowered his eyes and looked at Jean Canwin and the poem on the edge of the well. Soon, his pupils moved to the right and fixed on me. Chapter 324. Instantly, fear surged in my heart like a rising tide. Subconsciously, I wanted to retreat, but I didn't know if it was because I was nervous or because the Jing ghost had controlled my body, but I couldn't move. I could only watch the strange eyes of the Jing ghost gazing at me. Then he raised his thin, shriveled arm and reached for me. I was 3 or 4 meters away from the well, and the Jing ghost's arm was only half a meter long. The strange thing was that his body didn't move. He just lifted his arm, and he was right in front of me. His fingertips almost touched the bridge of my nose. My years of cultivation and my qi of Tao and qi of witchcraft were completely useless at this moment. I was like an ordinary baby that stood there and watched as the well ghost approached. I allowed the tide of fear to drown me. Right at this moment, there was a sudden explosion that sounded like a landslide. Dash, who hasn't died since ancient times? It was Jean Canwin's voice. His voice was very loud, and it didn't sound like a human's voice. His voice had a strange rhythm, and an unknown power rose. The Jing ghost's hand froze on the tip of my nose. I was shocked by the voice, and I pulled myself together. I dodged the Jing ghost's bony fingers and glanced in front of me. Jean Canwin stood there with his hands clasped behind his back. He was wearing a white robe, and he looked like an elegant scholar. However, his mouth didn't move, and I didn't know why he was making that sonorous voice. At this moment, a bright white light rose from the edge of the well. The white light was so strong that it lit up the entire cave. I didn't know when the Jing ghost had stepped there, but his entire body was shrouded in the white light. Just as my eyes were fixed on him, the Jing ghost's feet on the edge of the well disappeared. The white light seemed to contain an extremely high temperature. It was like hot water melting snow, and it directly melted the Jing ghost's body. First, it was his feet, then his calves, then his waist, chest. When I finally reacted, the Jing ghost's body was only left with his neck, head, and his arm, which was still in front of me, as expected of the lineage of Mount One. Although I don't know what kind of power is contained in the phrase, since time immemorial, who hasn't died? And I can't sense it either, but with just a glance, an ancient evil spirit that could injure a heavenly master couldn't resist at all. I know what kind of enormous power this is. I exhaled in relief, and my fear disappeared. I moved my eyes away from the edge of the well and looked at the Jing ghost's face. The Jing ghost didn't seem to notice that the white light was eroding his body, or maybe he didn't have time to notice it. His two strange eyeballs were still staring at me. I could even see the reflection of my body in his black pupils. The two withered muscles on both sides of his cheeks moved. It looked like he was squeezing a smile. It was really strange. Just as my eyes moved, his arm moved again. Just like before, he didn't care about the white light and continued to move his arm toward my face. The fear that had disappeared reappeared, and it was getting thicker. What does this old ghost want to do? I didn't have time to think. The withered finger finally touched the tip of my nose. A cold, rotten aura spread, making me shiver. Then, the finger slid down from the tip of my nose and gently touched my cheek. The cold, rotten aura seemed to have disappeared. I even felt a little warm. While I was still frightened, a white light suddenly exploded in front of me. The Jing ghost's head had disappeared. The white light moved along his shoulder, and the blackened, shriveled arm looked like a burning fuse. As the white light spread, it slowly disappeared in front of my eyes. The last thing that disappeared was the Jing ghost's finger that was still on my cheek. After the Jing ghost had completely disappeared, the white light on the edge of the well also disappeared. The stone room fell into darkness again. Only the searchlights that Han Wennan and I carried emitted two beams of light. One beam of light shone on the edge of the well, while the other beam of light shone on me. The two beams of light shone silently for more than 10 seconds. Then, the light that shone on me finally moved away and turned to Zhang Kanwen. Han Wennan's voice rang out. Brother Zhang, that thing, did you get rid of it? At this time, Zhang Kanwen recovered from his daze. After letting out a long sigh, he replied, it can be considered temporarily solved. Zhou Yi, how are you? That thing didn't hurt you, right? As he said that, he lifted his feet and walked toward me. I shivered and came back to my senses. The fear in my heart hadn't disappeared. The cold and rotten feeling on my face had yet to disappear. My voice was trembling. I took 2 deep breaths and said in a panic, I don't know. I think he touched me. As soon as I said that, Zhang Kanwen had already walked in front of me. He reached out to take down the searchlight above my head and shone it on my cheek. When the light shone on my face, I instantly squinted. My vision was slowly filled with light, as though the white light had reappeared in front of me. I didn't know why, but the panic in my heart suddenly calmed down. Zhang Kanwen's voice rang out. He let out a sigh of relief. You should be fine. That evil spirit didn't have time to hurt you. Didn't have time? I thought back carefully. At that time, Jing Gui's finger had slid from the tip of my pen to my cheek, and it had stayed on my cheek for a while. Judging from his ability to injure Yan Nantian with one glance, he could have crushed me into minced meat during that time. How could it be that he didn't have time? Even if he had been attacked by the white light and couldn't use his full power, as long as he had used 1% of his power, I wouldn't have been able to resist him. I understood that Jing Gui didn't have the intention to attack me at all. That was why I was unharmed at that moment. Why didn't he attack me? Why did he reach out and touch my cheek? Also, Zhang Kanwen was the one who attacked him, and Zhang Kanwen was standing next to the well, very close to him. Why did he give up what was close to him and reach out to me? Also, there was the corrosion of the white light. Although I didn't know what the white light was, and I didn't know if Jing Gui would feel pain, but Jing Gui's body was slowly disappearing into thin air. If he was a human, he would definitely be in great pain, right? At that time, he didn't think of a way to save himself. Instead, he endured the pain and danger just to touch me. No matter how I thought about it, it was really strange. I was dumbfounded and couldn't say a word. Zhang Kanwen and Han Wenren had recovered their composure. They discussed for a while, and then used the searchlight to search for Zhang Kanwen's ancestors' ashes in the altar. I shook my head a few times to get rid of the strange feeling in my heart. Then, I walked over and helped her. Earlier, when we were in this cave, we only noticed the altar and the vast mountain walls around it. We didn't notice that there were piles of gray powder at regular intervals below the mountain walls. Of course, even if we had noticed them, we wouldn't have thought that they were ashes. In fact, they were the ashes of Wen Shan's disciples from 1,000 years ago until now. According to Zhang Kanwen, this place was the holy land of Wen Shan's disciples. As long as their disciples didn't die tragically outside, they would come here when their lives were about to end. They would descend to the cave where the Tai Sui and the true dragon vein were. They would disperse their energy and fuse it with the unformed true dragon vein. Then he dragged his broken body and walked into the cave in the dark. He walked all the way to the altar and drank a mouthful of water from the round well. He walked to the bottom of the mountain wall and sat down cross-legged. Then a ball of heart flame would gush out and incinerate his body. After listening to him, I was shocked. Wen Shan's disciples had been working hard for the true dragon vein for more than 1,000 years. Even though time had passed and the Mongolian Empire had disappeared in less than 100 years, the common people of Huayo had risen up and rebuilt the 9 cauldrons. Even after hundreds of years of humiliation, until the birth of China, Wen Shan's disciples were still working hard. Maybe they had forgotten what their hard work meant, but there was no doubt that they had used their flesh and blood to pass on the pride of the past. I turned to look at Han Wenren, who was busy collecting the ashes. Chapter 3:25. After pondering for a long time, I came up with 2 solutions. One was to wait for Xiao Jin's transformation to come here and kill the people of the Han family. Xiao Jin was so strong that even the heavenly masters of the Han family wouldn't be his match. Once the heavenly masters died, the Han family would have to consider the consequences if they wanted to obtain the true dragon vein. However, Xiao Jin's condition wasn't stable. He could only transform for 2 hours. If he was delayed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Moreover, even if everything went smoothly, Xiao Jin would be exposed to the Metaphysics Society. Who knew what kind of trouble it would bring? After pondering for a while, I eliminated this solution. The second solution was to take drastic measures. The Han family and the Metaphysics Society were here for the true dragon vein. I had the jade bracelet, so I had to go all out and absorb the true dragon vein. Of course, the Han family would have to retreat. However, this was a self-destructive method. If I took the true dragon vein, everything here would be destroyed. The true dragon vein would never take shape. It was completely different from my original plan. Slowly, Grandmaster Zhang Kanwen's ashes were collected. My agitated mind also calmed down. I sighed and reluctantly chose to give up. Zhang Kanwen was stronger than me, and this was the ancestral land of his sect. If he chose to give up, why should I do it? Going against the Han family and the entire Metaphysics Society was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. The inside of the stone cave was isolated from the outside world. Grandmaster Zhang Kanwen's ashes were not damaged, but the erosion of time was enough to wear away more than half of them. In the end, the ashes that Zhang Kanwen collected added up to more than half of the urn that originally contained old Master Zhao's ashes. After that, we returned to the topic of the well ghost. Han Wenren was worried about the well ghost's whereabouts and the possible consequences. He asked Zhang Kanwen, "Brother Zhang, what method did you use? If the well ghost's body disappeared, Does it mean that it's already dead? Hearing his question, I didn't care. I just felt that he was too cautious. Perhaps he was too concerned about the Han family's benefits. The white light had swallowed the well ghost's body. What else could it be other than dead? Unexpectedly, Zhang Kanwen shook his head. It's just a method my sect left to deal with the evil spirit. It's very troublesome. It won't be that easy to get rid of it. Han Wennan and I were bewildered. Han Wennan asked, What should we do now? Will the evil spirit come back? Zhang Kanwen shook his head. It won, but it won't be that easy to get rid of. But you don't have to worry. This has nothing to do with the Han family. I will complete my sect's instructions. His words were laced with sarcasm. Han Wennan's face immediately turned ashamed when he heard it. He was silent for a while before he said embarrassedly, Brother Zhang, this matter concerns the interests of my Han family. If there's anything the Han family can help with, please don't hesitate to ask. I'll agree to it on behalf of my Han family. Zhang Kanwen shook his head again. There's no need for that. I just hope that the Han clan doesn't destroy the true dragon ley line. This is the node of the southern dragon ley line, and the dragon chi is related to the destiny of the entire southern dragon. The Han clan shouldn't be the sinner of your people. After saying that, he looked at Han Wennan with a burning gaze. Han Wennan also looked up at him and nodded solemnly. He said solemnly, the Han family will naturally pay attention to this matter. Although the Han family has lived in the Qinling Mountains for generations, with this true dragon vein, we will definitely expand to the south in the future. We, the Northerners, are very particular about the feelings of our neighbors, not to mention the fate of our nation. Just for the sake of our neighbors, the Han family will not do something like draining the pond to catch the fish. You don't have to worry about that. With his assurance, Zhang Kanwen nodded and was obviously relieved. He was an unyielding man. For the sake of the Wenshan bloodline's inheritance, he was willing to endure the humiliation of the Han clan seizing the ancestral land. However, if the Han clan did not express their stance for the sake of the Southern Dragon's destiny, he would have no other choice but to fight to the death. I also heaved a sigh of relief. On one hand, it was because of Zhang Kanwen, and on the other hand, it was because of the true dragon vein. Since the Han clan had promised to protect the true dragon vein, it would only take a few years to delay the formation of the true dragon vein. Since 1,000 years had passed, a few more years wouldn't make much of a difference. After a few years, when my power reached the Heavenly Master Realm, or when the seal in Little Gold's body was completely broken, I would have the power to resist the Han clan and the Metaphysics Association. Then I would return to this place and force the Han clan to hand over the true dragon vein. As a person who cultivated witchcraft energy, I would not help to transform the Tai Sui's corpse into the true dragon vein. However, I would allow it to develop and give Minister Wen's dream from 1,000 years ago a chance to come true. Of course, the premise was that my cultivation path was smooth. If I accidentally fell into the hands of the Metaphysics Association or the Buddhist and Taoist Association, my life would be in danger. Naturally, I would not think about these useless things. After we came to a conclusion, I looked at the time. According to Han Wennan, the Han clan's troops would arrive around evening. It was obvious that Zhang Kanwen and I couldn't stay here any longer. We bid farewell and left the orchard. After leaving the orchard, I invited Zhang Kanwen to go with me to my shop. We wanted to talk about what had happened recently. Zhang Kanwen and I had a special relationship. Even if it was a secret base like the Metaphysics Association, I didn't worry about him. I guessed Zhang Kanwen had a lot of questions that he wanted to ask me. He nodded and went with me. Zhang Kanwen was a bearded man. After the great change of his sect, He didn't take care of his appearance. He looked dispirited and dispirited. Moreover, he had an extraordinary cultivation base, which gave him an intimidating aura. When we returned to the shop, Xie Chenghua was startled. He stood there and didn't dare to say anything. He kept winking at me, trying to signal me with his eyes. I couldn't help but smile. I guessed Yan Nantian and Chen Yangting's visit had left a shadow in Xie Chenghua's heart. He was very sensitive now. I smiled and introduced Zhang Kanwen to Xie Chenghua. After listening to me, Xie Chenghua was surprised. He stepped forward and started to talk to me. After asking, I learned that Xie Chenghua had seen Zhang Kanwen before. However, he didn't recognize him because of his untidy appearance. After establishing a good relationship, we sat down and chatted with Xie Chenghua for a long time. However, since Xie Chenghua was the president of the Metaphysics Association's branch, he had good eyes. He urged us to go upstairs and said that he needed to take care of the shop's business. When we reached my room, Zhang Kanwen's smile froze. He was surprised to see Xiaojin, Tong Tong, and the ghoul in the room. He didn't say anything for a long time, and his face became more solemn. Although these three little fellows were quite strong, they had little contact with outsiders. At this moment, when they saw an outsider, their chatter instantly disappeared. Their gazes were filled with shyness and curiosity as they looked at Zhang Kanwen. After a while, Zhang Kanwen came back to his senses. He turned to me and asked in surprise, did you raise them? I frowned, as I didn't like the word raise. However, in the metaphysics world, ghouls and zombies were usually raised by cultivators for their own use. Moreover, they usually had to use forceful methods. It was more appropriate to say that they were raised. However, it was rare to see a ghoul like me. I nodded and smiled. That's right. These kids are like my younger brothers and sisters. I usually bring them with me. Zhang Kanwen looked at them a few more times. His face was still surprised and solemn. He asked me with uncertainty, if I'm not wrong, that girl's ghost should be a child, right? I smiled and nodded. It was one thing to be suspicious, but it was another to get confirmation. Zhang Kanwen's surprise became more obvious. After a long silence, he asked, is that little zombie the legendary ghoul? I still nodded with a smile. However, no one gave me a chance. The Metaphysics Association, which had always regarded me as their hope, immediately killed me. Even Grandfather Li, who had once saved my life and taken care of me secretly, had gone into hiding. It wasn't until a few days ago that Han Wennan didn't want to kill me due to our past relationship that my heart warmed a little. However, he just didn't want to hit me when I was down. Once it involved the family's benefits, his choice was no different from anyone else's. When he killed me, he would kill me. It was just that after experiencing the fickleness of human nature, I was too sensitive to all of this. Up until now, Zhang Kanwen was the first and only person who had clearly expressed his support for me. He was different from Nangong. He cultivated Qi of the Way, which made his support even more valuable. How could I not be excited? I slightly lowered my head to conceal the excitement in my heart. Before I could say anything, Zhang Kanwen changed the topic after expressing his stance. Although the people in the metaphysics world are chasing after you, there are only so many heavenly masters in the entire metaphysics world. Most of them are still in seclusion. With your current strength and these few little fellows, as long as you are careful, I don't think there are many people below the celestial master who are your match. This should be one of your secret strongholds, right? As long as you can guarantee that no one will find out about this place, you can cultivate in seclusion. With your talents, you will definitely reach the celestial master realm. When you have the ability to protect yourself, you can just make plans. I smiled and nodded. That's what I'm thinking too. I originally wanted to live in seclusion for a period of time. The previous incident happened because a friend of mine was involved in that case. I had no choice but to use my avatar to rescue her. Who knew that the case would involve so many people? Luckily, there weren't any serious consequences. After my friend is safe, I won't have anything to do for a short period of time. I'll stay here and cultivate in peace. Actually, there was something I didn't say. I was indeed willing to cultivate in peace, but in reality, I couldn't stay here for long. It wasn't that I didn't want to, but that I couldn't. The cultivation of qi was different from qi of the way. No matter how talented I was, I had to find qi that I could absorb. However, I already had a plan. Previously, when I was in the cave, I had absorbed enough witchcraft aura to digest it for a while. After I had digested it, I would go to Thailand and go to the palace to find more witchcraft aura to continue my cultivation. After what had happened during this period of time, I could roughly guess that there should be a Tai Sui's corpse in the Grand Palace. As for the wet dragon granny, since she could use the power of the 9 spirits, she most likely cultivated qi as well. There shouldn't be any danger there. At that time, I would be far away from the disputes of the metaphysics world in the country, so I wouldn't have to worry about my safety. As this matter was rather troublesome, I didn't mention it. After Zhang Kanwen saw that I had agreed, he carefully reminded me that I had to be careful while living in seclusion, especially around people who had dealings with the metaphysics world. I had to keep an eye on them and use some methods to monitor them. I couldn't let my guard down as it was a matter of life and death, so I couldn't be too careful. I nodded. He was right. Although Xie Chenghua, Lu Chuanda, and the others had pupils' restriction spell in their bodies, with my current knowledge of the metaphysics world, I couldn't guarantee that the restriction spell could restrain them. After all, pupil only had the glorious consciousness cultivation base. Any heavenly master could remove the restriction spell that she had planted. If they had bad intentions, it wouldn't be too difficult to exchange my information for a heavenly master to help them remove the restriction spell. Besides them, there were also Wang Yongjun and Yang Kaichen. Although they had a close relationship with me, we had to be careful in extreme times. After talking about this, I remembered that Zhang Kanwen had told me about the well ghost. At that time, Han Wennan had asked him what he was going to do next, but he hadn't said much. I was also curious, so I asked him. Zhang Kanwen smiled and said carelessly, the poem at that time was only the first step in sending the evil spirit away. It was far from killing him. The white light actually sent him to the Yinshang royal mausoleum. The evil spirit was originally a sacrifice of the Shang dynasty, and his burial place was also in the Yinshang royal mausoleum. If we want to send him back to the nether realm, we can only start from this point. Later on, I will go to the Indi, which is now Anyang. I will enter the royal tomb and send the evil spirit back completely. He said it indifferently, but my heart tightened when I heard it. I quickly asked, Big Brother Zhang, will it be dangerous? Zhang Kanwen had always been open and honest, so he didn't purposely try to ease my heart. He smiled and said, of course, danger is unavoidable. However, the ancestors have already passed down a method. This matter is also the ancestors' instructions, so it can't be avoided. I have to go. I thought for a while, then raised my head to look at him. This matter is related to me. I wonder when Big Brother Zhang plans to go. I'll go with you. You're going too? Zhang Kanwen was silent for a while. Then he shook his head. You've seen the evil spirit's power. Although our Wenshan lineage has a method to deal with the evil spirit that has been passed down from generation to generation. No one knows if it's still effective after 1,000 years. Moreover, if everything goes smoothly, I can deal with it alone. If something unexpected happens, even if you go with me, it won't be of much help." He was right. That was the truth. However, I still shook my head and said with a smile, "Big Brother Zhang, since I'm involved in this matter, it's related to me. Moreover, no matter if it's the Wenshan lineage's ancestral land or the evil spirit itself, it's related to the Shang dynasty's witchcraft war. If I go with you, I can learn more about the truth of the witchcraft war." After listening to me, Zhang Camwen hesitated for a while, then nodded in agreement. I didn't expect that he had already helped me. I didn't decline and took the talisman. I immediately took a drop of my blood and followed Zhang Camwen's instructions to drip it into a small circle on the talisman. Afterwards, I went downstairs to find Xie Chenghua. Without him noticing, I took a drop of his blood and also dripped it into the talisman. Xie Chenghua might have glory of consciousness initial stage cultivation, but the present was different from the past. His cultivation was far from mine. It didn't take much effort to secretly take a drop of his blood. After dealing with Xie Chenghua, I contacted Wang Yongjun and Yang Kaichen. After meeting with them, it was much easier to take their blood. However, after taking their blood, I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Speaking of which, I was a little too petty to measure the heart of a gentleman. However, this was a matter of life and death, so it wasn't up to me. As long as they didn't betray me, I would repay them generously in the future. To make up for the guilt in my heart, I purposely gave Yang Kaichen some Dao energy and gave him 2 defensive talismans. Then, I went to Wang Yongjun's house. The geomancy of his house wasn't bad, but I still used some tricks to change the aura of his house. It would be beneficial to his health and luck. To achieve this, I even asked Zhang Camwen to make a precious scarlet talisman for him. With my current cultivation base, I could make a red talisman myself. However, the talismans I made contained witchcraft energy. To be safe, I didn't want to take this risk. After dealing with the 3 of them, the police released Lu Chuanda. When I went to see Han Wennan and told him about the well ghost, I didn't mention Lu Chuanda. However, I knew Han Wennan's character. He was a member of the expert group. As long as he knew the truth, he would announce it to the public. Lu Chuanda's case would be solved. As he had been imprisoned for many days, he looked dispirited. However, when Xie Chenghua told him about the things I had done to save him, Lu Chuanda looked grateful. His complexion was much better, and he repeatedly thanked me. Although I didn't want to force him to repay me, it was a critical time, and I was glad to receive his gratitude. Of course, while we were talking about our relationship, we also had to use some tricks. I also took a drop of his blood and put it on the talisman. After that, I was free. I stayed in the feng shui shop every day to digest the witchcraft energy I had absorbed. At the same time, I studied the astral steps recorded in the death scripture. The astral steps could be said to be the most important spell in the glorious consciousness realm. It was related to combat power and cultivation realm. However, ever since I had officially entered the glorious consciousness realm, I didn't have any free time. That was why I had only learned 1 step of the 9-star heavenly spirits. We just needed to imitate him and paralyze him. Then we could seize the chance to let the snake spirit absorb his blood. However, there was a problem. Yanantian had used the mouse that day. Although it was difficult to find the obsidian stone, we could always find a way. However, he had used some unknown fungi. I didn't know what they were. How could we find them? I told the snake spirit what I was worried about. The snake spirit laughed and told me, "I know what those fungi are. When I go to Yunnan, I can find them and bring them back." It turned out he had already thought of a way. If that was the case, I didn't have anything else to say. "After you finish absorbing the liquid, we can go to Yunnan." The snake spirit was even more anxious than me. "We can leave now. When we find those fungi, we'll finish digesting the liquid in his body." This was related to his transformation into a dragon. It was normal for him to be anxious. I nodded and agreed to his request. The snake spirit saw me nod and was about to leave. However, I stopped him and asked, "Can you transform into a dragon after swallowing Xiang Lu's blood? Is there anything else you need to do?" The reason why I asked this was mainly because I was considering that I would be going to Anyang with Zhang Canwen in 2 months. Calculating the time, if everything went smoothly for the spirit snake, it would probably transform into a dragon at that time. At that time, the spirit snake would be in a rush to transform into a dragon, and the two matters might clash. The snake spirit rolled his eyes at me. "It's not that easy. After swallowing Xiang Lu's blood, he needs time to digest it. Moreover, after that, he needs to go to Luoyang." I felt strange. "Why do you want to go to Luoyang?" The snake spirit's face turned serious. "There's a place in Luoyang called the Dragon Gate. In this world, when a creature wants to get rid of its mortal body and transform into a dragon, besides cultivating, the last step is to go to the Dragon Gate and jump over it." Although the snake spirit had become a spirit, he was still the snake god. Jumping over the Dragon Gate was the first step to transform into a dragon. Chapter 328. After explaining everything to me, the spirit serpent departed. Before leaving, I wanted to give him some protective treasures. However, I hesitated for a while and decided not to do so. The snake spirit's cultivation was at the glory of consciousness realm. After absorbing the liquid, his power was infinitely close to the pinnacle of glory of consciousness. In terms of power, he was much stronger than me, so I didn't need to worry about his safety. Unless he met someone at the celestial master realm, even if he couldn't defeat them, he would at least be able to escape with his life. After the snake spirit left, my life returned to peace. The shaman energy in my body had completely calmed down. Every day, I spent all my energy on researching the 9-star Heavenly Dipper. On the second day after the snake spirit left, I finally succeeded in taking the second step of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper, which was the Merak Steps. The first star of the Big Dipper was called Dubhe, also known as the Yang Heavenly Wolf Star Sovereign. The second star was called Dubhe, also known as the Een Spirit Giant Gate Star Sovereign. Solitary Yang and solitary Een didn't exist, so the first 2 steps consumed a lot of energy, and the efficiency was extremely low. However, after comprehending these 2 steps, the Een and Yang complemented each other, making the subsequent steps much simpler. Not long after, I comprehended the 3rd step, Fekta, the 4th step, Migres, and the 5th step, Alioth. Of course, other than the Een and Yang complementing each other in the first 2 steps, the speed at which I progressed was related to my stabilized cultivation at the intermediate stage of glory of consciousness. As for the remaining 4 steps, Opening Sun and Alcade, they could only be cultivated at the advanced stage of glory of consciousness or even the pinnacle of glory of consciousness. As for the last 2 stars, the astral steps which corresponded to the Een star were even more illusory. Whether one could successfully cultivate the glory of consciousness realm depended on fate. According to the death scripture, if one couldn't cultivate the glory of consciousness realm, it was normal for one to slowly cultivate it at the celestial master realm. Even though it was only these 5 steps, it was enough to make me excited. I couldn't say for sure how powerful they were without any proof. However, I had a general feeling that if I used all 5 astral steps at the same time, the power wouldn't be any weaker than Lu Qingping's righteous ruler's 7 steps. The Lu family was a famous family in the field of metaphysics. The direct descendant of the Lu family would definitely not be weak. In fact, the Gongyu's 7 steps was quite famous in the field of metaphysics. But this 9-star celestial dipper was able to match the power of the entire Gongyu's 7 steps with just 5 steps. It was clear that it was extraordinary. No wonder the death scripture said that the last 2 steps, stellar concealment steps, could contend against a heavenly master. Of course, all of this is only my guess for the time being. If I want to verify it, I'll have to find someone to verify it first. If it was in the past, it wouldn't have been easy to find an opportunity to verify it. I could only test it in a real battle. But now, Zhang Canwen was here. His strength wasn't inferior to Lu Qingping's, and when he used this Song of Righteousness, he could easily defeat Lu Qingping. It had been a few months since he started cultivating the Song of Morality, and his cultivation had also reached glorious memory later stage. Finding him to verify the power of the 9-star heavenly spirit was the most suitable choice. During this time, Zhang Canwen didn't stay idle. Although he stayed in the shop, I didn't have many chances to see him. This fellow stayed in his room all day, saying that he was preparing for the trip to Anyang. I didn't know what he was doing all day. When I went to look for him, I knocked on the door for a long time before Zhang Canwen answered and hastily opened the door. I raised my head and saw that large beads of sweat were flowing down his face. The collar and chest area of his clothes were also wet. I was stunned and asked him what was going on. Zhang Canwen only replied indifferently that he was cultivating. I was puzzled after hearing that. Cultivation in metaphysics was different from training the body. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to sweat a lot. However, each sect's cultivation method was different, so I didn't ask too much. I changed the topic and briefly explained my purpose for coming here. After hearing my words, Zhang Canwen smiled and said, "I've heard from Wen Fei that your cultivation technique isn't simple. Previously in Meizhou, you were able to block Lu Qingping's Gongyu's 7 steps with a mere pressure point realm. Now that you've mastered the astral steps, its power will definitely be extraordinary. All right, when do you think it's a good time for us to exchange pointers?" Before coming here, I had already thought about the time and place for the exchange. I immediately replied, "Tomorrow is the 30th of the 12th lunar month. Xiao Jin transforms twice at the beginning and middle of each month. He needs to go to a secluded place. The 2 of us should go there together and exchange pointers." When I introduced Xiao Jin last time, I only said that he had a restriction in his body and couldn't use his strength. I didn't tell him about Xiao Jin's transformation. Hearing this, Zhang Canwen was stunned. However, he didn't ask anything and just nodded in agreement. After discussing this matter, Zhang Canwen went downstairs with me and ate lunch with Xie Changhua and Lu Chuanda. Afterwards, he hurriedly returned to his room. I didn't hurry to go back. I stayed behind to check the accounts with Xie Changhua and Lu Chuanda. Then, I gave them a sum of money. Although they were under my control and had to work for me, I couldn't treat them like slaves even if I had a restriction. Of course, I wouldn't hesitate to give them the payment they deserved. After dealing with this matter, I gave them a holiday. During the new year, they can go home to reunite with their families. After the new year, after dealing with their family matters, we can come back and continue our business. Zhang Canwen and I were different. They had their own families, and it wasn't appropriate for them to stay here alone during the New Year's Eve. Xie Changhua agreed with me, with a smile on his face. He repeatedly thanked me. However, Lu Chuanda hesitated for a while. "I don't need to go back for the New Year's Eve. I want to stay in the shop." I was bewildered. After asking, I learned that his parents had passed away a long time ago. He had no wife or children. Although he had a few brothers, at his age, they had already married and had children. They had their own families. It wasn't appropriate for him to go to their homes during the New Year's Eve. Even if he went back to Foshan, he would be living alone. It would be better for him to stay here and keep me company. Metaphysics was also considered cultivation, but it didn't mean to be a monk. In fact, marrying and having children was a part of one's life. It was good for cultivation. Not many people would stay single for the rest of their lives. It wasn't in line with the traditional values of China. I didn't know if Lu Chuanda had never married or if something had happened to him. I wanted to ask him, but he looked gloomy. After hesitating for a while, I didn't ask. I just smiled and nodded, asking him to stay. In the blink of an eye, it was the next day. At noon, I took Xiao Jin and Zhang Kanwen out. I wanted to call a taxi, but since it was almost the New Year's Eve, all the cars on the street had disappeared. Feeling helpless, I had to call Wang Kuan. Last time, when I was helping Xiao Jin find a place to transform, Wang Kuan had told me that his wife was having a baby. I had promised him that when the baby was born, I would give him a locket. However, too many things had happened recently, and I didn't have time to do that. I had forgotten about it and hadn't given him the locket until now. A few days ago, I remembered that I wanted to visit his house. But then I thought about it. It was almost the New Year's Eve. If I gave him a locket during the New Year's Eve, it would be a good time. Wang Kuan's voice was a little gloomy on the phone. I asked him to come over, and he didn't ask. He just agreed. Not long after, he drove to the shop. After Xiao Jin, Zhang Kanwen, and I got in the car, we headed to Hui Province. Although Wang Kuan was a steady person, he was a lively person. Usually when we stayed together, we would have a lot to talk about. But today, he was very unusual. He just drove and didn't say a word. I felt strange. His hands that were holding the steering wheel were trembling. The car shook violently, and with a screech of brakes, it stopped by the side of the road. It caused a series of horns to sound from the back. Fortunately, they had just left the house and hadn't gotten on the highway yet. Otherwise, this would have caused a serious car accident. I turned to look at Wang Kuan's face. At that moment, his face was pale. He mumbled a few times before saying softly with a trembling voice, "No, there's no need. My son, he shouldn't be able to use the longevity lock." He was a big man, but after saying that, he seemed to have exhausted all his energy. When he said the words longevity locket, his eyes turned red. Although I had already predicted this, I felt a little down after hearing his sorrowful words. I sighed and asked him, "I've been in the shop all this time. If you have something that you can't solve, why didn't you come to me? Even if you can't leave, you have the shop's phone number. Why didn't you call me?" I was puzzled. Wang Kuan believed in metaphysics. If something strange happened to his son, he should have thought of me immediately. Why did he choose to remain silent? Wang Kuan rubbed his eyes and revealed a bitter smile. He shook his head and said, "I wanted to come to you, but after thinking about it, I didn't come. My son didn't encounter any evil spirits. He got sick. The doctor said that it was a very serious congenital heart disease. It was diagnosed when he was born. I didn't want to give up, but facing this disease, no one can do anything. I know you have profound Taoist techniques, but no matter how profound your Taoist techniques are, I'm afraid you can't do anything about this disease, right? Actually, I came to the shop, but you weren't there. Uncle Xie said that you were busy, and he seemed to have something to do, too. I thought about it and decided not to trouble you. What he said was strange. Congenital heart disease. If that was the case, what was the Yin spirit in between Wang Kuan's eyebrows? I thought about it. Many supernatural events could harm the human body, which could lead to other diseases. No matter what, the Yin spirit in between Wang Kuen's eyebrows wasn't fake. There was more to it than meets the eye. I sighed and couldn't help but scold him. You're really muddle-headed. It's related to my son's life. How do you know that Taoist techniques can't cure him? How do you know that it's useless to come to me? Wang Kuen was stunned. Not only did he not get angry because of my scolding, but he also showed shock on his face. At the same time, there was also a hint of joy. He turned around and grabbed my arm. He opened his eyes wide and asked in a trembling voice, "What did you say? You can cure this disease?" I shook my head. There are many possible causes of congenital heart disease. Sometimes, even doctors can't tell what the cause is. I also don't know if Taoist techniques can cure it. However, from what I know, I'm afraid your son doesn't have a congenital heart disease. It's the evil spirit you mentioned. I can cure it. Wang Kuen had calmed down a little. However, after listening to me, his body shivered again. His eyes brightened. He asked excitedly, Really? I wasn't in a good mood. Why would I lie to you? Take 2 deep breaths to calm yourself down. Then, tell me about your son's situation. Wang Kuen's anxious expression was gone. He was full of energy now. He didn't need to calm himself down. He immediately told me about his son's situation in detail. Just like what he had said, his son was sent to the ICU as soon as he was born. The doctor's conclusion was that he had a congenital heart disease that couldn't be cured. He could only live for half a year at most. Wang Kuen, who had just become a father, was devastated. He had some understanding of metaphysics. However, it was because of this understanding that he knew metaphysics wasn't a swindler that could cure all diseases. To some incurable diseases, all methods were useless. The most trustworthy thing was still medical science. Because of this, he didn't stay at home on New Year's Eve. As soon as I called him, he came out. After listening to him, Zhang Canwen, who was sitting in the back seat, suddenly asked me, "What should we do now? Should we go to his house first?" I pondered for a while, but didn't answer him. Instead, I asked Wang Kuen about his son's condition. After confirming that his son's condition was stable and that his life wasn't in danger, I decided to follow our original plan and deal with Xiao Jin's transformation first. After all, Xiao Jin was going to transform tonight. We couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't feel at ease leaving Xiao Jin here alone. After I explained everything to Wang Kuen, although he was anxious, he didn't rush me. On the way back, he seemed to be in high spirits. He even called his wife to tell her the good news. When we arrived at Dragon Gate County, which connected Hui Province and Heiyuan, I wanted to wait for Xiao Jin to transform first before sparring with Zhang Canwen to prove the power of the 9-star heavenly spirits. However, it seemed that I didn't have the time. Luckily, we had arrived early, and it wasn't deep in the night yet. Zhang Canwen and I found a place to have a simple sparring session. At first, Zhang Canwen didn't use the Song of Righteousness. He chose a simple astral footwork technique that he had practiced before to fight me. However, he soon found that although his cultivation base was higher than mine, he couldn't defeat me with this ordinary astral footwork. I had only used the first 3 steps to break his astral footwork. Zhang Canwen finally became serious and used the Song of Righteousness. However, before he started, he warned me that the Song of Righteousness was extremely powerful. Once he used it, he wouldn't be able to stop until he had finished each line. The raging dust and particles turned into quiet hills and rivers that were as deep as the abyss, not moving at all. At this moment, the sharp silver light that had reached this place was like a piece of iron encountering a magnet. Its trajectory was completely messed up, and it was forcefully sucked towards the small mountain. A series of clanging sounds could be heard as all the silver rays collided with the small mountain and shattered before disappearing. However, the small mountain was still standing tall and proud. After all the silver rays had disappeared, it slowly faded and then disappeared. After using the Sky Dipper twice and the second time, I used 5 steps in one go. The shaman energy in my body had been consumed by half. I was slightly panting as I closed my eyes to adjust my breathing. After the shaman energy in my body had calmed down, I reopened my eyes to see Zhang Kanwen looking at me with a burning gaze. His eyes were filled with admiration as he said, "As expected, I didn't mention that your Tao techniques are extremely exquisite. Although this Sky Dipper technique only has 5 steps, in terms of power, Lu Qingping's 7 steps of righteousness can't compare to yours." No, it's not that they can't compare. It's that there's an obvious difference. His 7 steps of righteousness can at most block the first 2 lines of my song of righteousness. As for you, your Sky Dipper technique is new and you haven't perfected it, but it's already enough to block 3 of my lines. After you've perfected it, I'm afraid that its power will increase tremendously. After testing the true power of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper, it seemed to be better than what I had expected. I was in a good mood as I smiled. Then, after I've perfected it, I'll come back to ask Brother Zhang for advice. At that time, I'll be able to witness the power of the 4th line of the Song of Righteousness. I was just casually saying that, but Zhang Kanwen shook his head at me. The 4th line is different from the first 3 lines. The first 4 lines are the first part of the Song of Righteousness. If the 4th line is recited, the power will change, although your Sky Dipper technique is exquisite, and after you've perfected it, it won't be a match for the 4th line. I was stunned for a moment before I smiled. Although Zhang Kanwen was wild and unrestrained, he was still a gentleman. His words were definitely not without reason, but a kind reminder. However, his 4th sentence would cause a qualitative change in his strength. Wouldn't my 9-star Heavenly Dipper 6th step be the same? From the distribution of the Big Dipper, the first 7 stars were the Emperor stars, also known as the 7 Emperors of the Big Dipper, while the last 2 stars were the auxiliary stars. However, their true power lay not in the Emperor stars, but in the auxiliary stars. The first 5 stars were extremely far away from the auxiliary stars and had no connection with each other. However, the 6th and 7th stars were extremely close to the auxiliary and bi-stars. Their auras and fates were connected. The 9 stars of Heavenly Dipper and 9 stars of Heavenly Dipper would correspond to each other. Furthermore, the power of the 9 stars of Heavenly Dipper would increase exponentially. For example, when I used the first 3 steps, I still couldn't defeat the first line of his Song of Righteousness. However, when I used the first 5 steps, I was able to defeat the next 2 lines. With the addition of these 2 aspects, it would not be an exaggeration to say that the 6th step of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper was a qualitative change. However, I didn't say this in detail. Instead, I smiled at Zhang Kanwen and kept him in suspense. I was prepared to surprise him when the time came. After we finished exchanging pointers, it was just about time for Xiao Jin to transform. I quickly brought Xiao Jin down to the mountain valley and arranged for him to stay there. After that, I returned to meet up with Zhang Kanwen. After I returned, Zhang Kanwen curiously looked at Xiao Jin in the distance. Just as he was about to ask, Xiao Jin's body changed. He quickly rose up and became a 10-meter-tall giant. With a leap, I had seen this scene many times and was already used to it. However, it was Zhang Kanwen's first time seeing it. His entire body was stunned. The question he wanted to ask me was swallowed back into his mouth. He was so stunned that he couldn't speak. After a minute, Xiao Jin had already sat down cross-legged to cultivate. Zhang Kanwen finally reacted. He turned his head to look at me and said with a wry smile, "So, the transformation you mentioned is to restore his original body. What's going on? Didn't you say that there was a restriction in his body that suppressed all of his power?" I nodded and didn't try to hide it anymore. I told him the truth. Zhang Kanwen was even more shocked. He turned to look at Xiao Jin. After a long time, he sighed and said, "It's a pity if his power wasn't sealed. I'm afraid that even if all the heavenly masters of the Metaphysics Association joined hands, they wouldn't dare to trouble you." After he said that, I also smiled wryly. "Yeah, if that's the case, I'll directly take Xiao Jin to the Liu family to take revenge. Then, I'll find a place to cultivate in seclusion. I won't have to live in fear like this anymore." Then Zhang Kanwen asked me, "Why is Xiao Jin's body golden? Are all living Tai Sui golden-colored?" I shook my head. I was also curious about this. I had seen several Tai Sui's corpses, but none of them had golden skin like Xiao Jin. I didn't know if the Tai Sui's skin color would change when it was alive, or if Xiao Jin was special. After chatting for a while, I didn't want to miss Xiao Jin's transformation. After I explained the situation to Zhang Kanwen, I sat cross-legged and began to cultivate until Xiao Jin's transformation ended. Such a short period of cultivation wasn't enough for me to break through to a higher realm. It just made the witchcraft energy in my body more condensed. My 4-star glorious consciousness realm was becoming more stable, but I was still far from the 5-star glorious consciousness realm. I wouldn't be able to break through in a short time. On Xiao Jin's side, after these few times of cultivation, he could now maintain his form for nearly 4 hours. Compared with before, he had made great progress, but he was still far from completely breaking the restriction. As for the absorption of the true dragon vein in the jade bracelet, I asked him about it. However, Xiao Jin said that it would take at least half a year to absorb the true dragon vein. Moreover, even if he finished absorbing it, it was hard to say whether he could completely break the barrier. Wang Kuan was still waiting for us outside the forest, not far away. I didn't dawdle and brought Xiao Jin and Zhang Kanwen back to Wang Kuan's car. We rushed to Shenzhen Central Hospital overnight. It was the hospital where Wang Yongjun had a private intensive care unit. Chapter 3:31. When we arrived at the hospital, not only was Wang Kuan's wife there, but Wang Yongjun had also rushed over after hearing the news. He was waiting anxiously outside the neonatal ICU. When he saw us, he immediately came forward and pulled my hand. Bro Zhou, is what you said true? Can this child's illness be cured?" On the way here, Wang Kuan had told me that Wang Yongjun didn't have any children despite his age. He had always treated him as his son. Naturally, Wang Yongjun had also treated his son as his grandson. I lifted my head to look as Wang Yongjun asked. His eyes were moist. It was obvious that he was extremely emotional. I nodded. "I can't guarantee that it can be cured, but I can confirm that the child's illness isn't caused by heart disease. Let me see the situation first." Wang Yongjun was someone who had been through a lot, so he quickly calmed down. He nodded and brought us to the ward. The full name of the ICU was Intensive Care Ward, especially the neonatal ICU. It was a sterile ward, and the patient's family wasn't allowed to enter. When we reached the ward's door, the doctor quickly came over and stopped us from entering. Wang Yongjun was rich and powerful, but in the hospital, his family members were critically ill. No matter how powerful he was, he still had to listen to the doctor. The doctor who stopped us seemed to have medical ethics. No matter what Wang Yongjun and Wang Kuan said, he didn't allow us to enter. He said that the newborn was too fragile. If we entered, we might be infected with any kind of bacteria, and it could lead to serious consequences. In a moment of desperation, Wang Kuan told the doctor that we were here to treat the child. It would have been better if he hadn't said it, but now that he said it, the doctor straightened his face and said stiffly, "You don't trust our hospital. You can transfer the child for treatment, but you can't mess around like this. As long as you're here, you have to listen to us. Of course, I don't recommend that you transfer to another hospital for treatment. We are the best hospital in the country in terms of neonatal care. Moreover, the child won't be able to withstand the torment of transferring." Then, the doctor crossed his arms. It was obvious that he was prepared to drag it out with us. Wang Yongjun and I looked at each other. We didn't know what to do. Actually, the doctor wasn't wrong. Although I didn't know much about hospitals, I knew that no one was allowed to enter this kind of sterile intensive care unit. However, the situation was special, and I couldn't explain it to a Western doctor. Moreover, the doctor was right. The child was too fragile. He had to stay in this sterile ward to survive. There was no way he could be transferred out. While we didn't know what to do, we heard a surprised voice behind us. "Mr. Zhou." I turned around and saw a middle-aged doctor in a white coat. His hair was combed neatly as he hurried toward me. His eyes gazed at me, his face surprised. After walking in front of me, the person said to me in broken Chinese, "Mr. Zhou, long time no see. How come you have time to come to the hospital today?" He didn't wait for my answer and turned to look at the ICU ward. He suddenly understood. "Mr. Zhou, are you here to treat this child? That's great. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that girl in a vegetative state last time. It was amazing. Will Mr. Zhou be able to cure this child this time?" His words were incoherent. At this moment, I remembered that he was the private doctor, Lin Bide, whom I had met in Wang Yongjun's intensive care unit. However, I felt a little strange. After he lost a bet with me, Wang Yongjun fired him. He was forced to give up Western medicine and study Chinese medicine. At that time, Wang Yongjun had sent someone to watch him. With Wang Yongjun's methods, this guy shouldn't have broken his promise. I turned to look at Wang Yongjun. Wang Yongjun smiled at me and said, "Dr. Lin is currently a consultant in the cardiology department of this hospital. At the same time, he is studying Chinese medicine at Shenzhen University." It seemed that Wang Yongjun wasn't that unreasonable. Lin Bide had indeed gone to study Chinese medicine, but he hadn't lost his job in Western medicine. I smiled and nodded. "That's right. I'm here to treat this child." Lin Bide didn't seem to care about the previous disagreement. He rubbed his hands excitedly and pulled me toward the ward. He mumbled, "That's great. I finally have the chance to see Mr. Zhou's magical Chinese medicine again." After 2 steps, the doctor who had blocked the way stood up again. He said to Lin Bide with an embarrassed face, "Dr. Lin, the ICU doesn't allow the patient's family to enter." Before he could finish, Lin Bide said with a straight face, "He's not the patient's family. He's an authoritative expert in Chinese medicine. He's my tutor. We're going in to treat the patient. Go to the disinfection room and prepare 2 sets of isolation suits. We'll be there immediately." It was obvious that Lin Bide's position in this hospital wasn't low. The doctor hesitated for a moment. In the end, he didn't dare to say anything and left with his tail between his legs. It was true that a county official couldn't be compared to a local official. This little doctor had forced Wang Yongjun and me into a corner, but he didn't dare to question Lin Bide's words. Not long after, the doctor came back. "Everything is ready. We can go now." Lin Bide turned around and apologized to Wang Yongjun. He asked them to wait outside. Then he took Zhang Kanwen and me to the ward. When we arrived at the disinfection room, Lynn Bide went to get another set of isolation suits. The three of us changed and disinfected. Then we went to the ward and saw Wong Kuen's son lying on the small bed. The baby, who wasn't even a month old, had an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. Chapter 332. This restless feeling was really strong. However, after observing for a long time, I didn't find any clues. I couldn't determine what the black spots and pits meant, and I couldn't tell where the Yin energy was coming from. From a metaphysical point of view, there were three possibilities for a living person to have such thick Yin energy. The first possibility was that the person had touched something foul and was possessed. The second possibility was that the person had cultivated a special technique. The third possibility was that the person had been in contact with Yin spirits for a long time. For example, the people who had experienced Yin spirits would have thick Yin energy on their bodies. I had considered these three possibilities. However, Wong Kuen's son wasn't even a month old. He couldn't have cultivated a Yin technique. Furthermore, such a young child was unlikely to come into contact with ghosts. Even if he had accidentally come into contact with ghosts, based on the density of the baleful Yin Qi on his body, it would take at least 10 to 20 years of accumulation before it could form. After eliminating these two possibilities, I focused on the possibility that the child was possessed. Being possessed by a spirit or a ghost was a very common situation. The behaviors that people usually talked about, such as being possessed, running into ghosts, hysteria, and so on, were all originally referring to such situations. Although it was a common situation, it wasn't easy to deal with it. It wasn't a disease, and the severity of the possession depended on the cultivation base of the spirit. If the child was possessed by an ordinary wandering spirit, a scream from the people around could scare it away. However, if the child was possessed by a powerful spirit or spirit, it would be troublesome. If I didn't find a cultivator whose cultivation base was higher than the spirit's, I couldn't send the spirit away. If the child was really possessed from the intensity of the Yin energy, the spirit wouldn't be simple. I wasn't sure if I could deal with it or not. However, I wasn't in a hurry to expel it. I needed to confirm the situation first. It wasn't a problem for me, since it was common to be possessed by a spirit. The metaphysical world had developed a simple and effective method to detect whether an otherworldly item had possessed a person or not. I turned around and asked Wong Kuen if he still had the Scorching Sun talisman I had given him. After getting an affirmative answer, I asked him to take out the talisman. I held it in my palm and urged my Tao energy to erase the cinnabar seal on it, leaving only a yellow talisman with a slight fluctuation of Tao energy. The yellow talisman paper was originally long. After I folded it and tore it apart, it became 2 square pieces of paper. Then I carefully placed the 2 yellow talisman papers on Wong Kuen's son's eyelids that were tightly shut. People had 3 souls: heaven, earth, and man. The heavenly soul was a life soul. Most Yin souls only had 2 souls, the earth soul and the human soul. Due to the special nature of the human soul, it would not dissipate even after death. Thus, when a person was possessed by a Yin soul, it was usually the earth soul that was covered by the Yin soul. The heaven, earth, and man souls corresponded to the glabella, the eyes, and the baihui of a person's body. If there was a problem, these 3 spots would be the first to show signs. However, it was hard to see them with the naked eye. That was why special tools were needed to detect them. The 2 yellow talisman papers I used were tools to detect whether Wong Kuen's son's earth soul was stable or not. In fact, there were many tools that could be used for detection, and the yellow talisman paper was just one of them. Since it could absorb energy, well, its detection effect was also the most accurate. Aside from that, we could also use leaves. The rounder the leaf, the better the effect. For example, The leaves of the drought golden lotus could be compared to the yellow talisman paper. If a silver soul spirit possessed a person, due to the soul's special magnetic field, the detection item would have a strange phenomenon. The specific phenomenon might be different, but the most common situation was that the detection item would spin on the eyelids. After putting the yellow talisman paper away, I stared at it without blinking. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes. Time passed quickly, but the 2 yellow talisman papers were still quietly on Wang Kuan's son's eyelids. There was no movement at all. My eyebrows furrowed even tighter. When the Earth soul was covered, the magnetic field would be extremely strong. Under normal circumstances, there would be a strange phenomenon within 3 minutes. However, there was no movement after 10 minutes. It could only mean that the situation wasn't correct. The yin energy on Wang Kuan's son wasn't due to the possession of a spirit. However, if it wasn't because of the possession, none of the 3 situations were correct. Then where did the yin energy and the black pit on his chest come from? After a moment of silence, I extended my hand to retrieve the 2 yellow talisman papers. I asked Wang Kuan for the child's birth information. Since I couldn't find any clues from his body, I could only look at his fate. In terms of fate, I could only be considered a beginner. However, a child's fate was not difficult to calculate. After a few minutes, I calculated his fate. It was different from what I had guessed. Wang Kuan's son's fate was extremely precious. There were no signs of him dying early. On the contrary, his fate palaces were in the Chou and Wei palaces. They were located in the Wunchang and Wenxiu stars. It was as if the Wunxing star was protecting his life. I couldn't find any problems with his body, and his fate was so precious. What was the problem? Ghosts had a real body, but not everyone could see them. For example, there were so many people in the ward, but only Zhang Canwen and I, who had reached a certain level of cultivation, could see it. Ordinary people, like Wang Kuan and Wang Yongjun, couldn't see it. When I called out the ghost, they didn't react at all. How could Wang Kuan's son see it? When I had just started cultivating, I could only vaguely feel the yin energy. It was only after I reached the Earth Master realm that I could see the ghost's body clearly. Although there was a saying among the people that children could see dirty things, this saying was actually unfounded. Children were indeed more sensitive to auras than adults, but at most they could only sense a vague aura. It was impossible for them to see it directly. I immediately realized that he had something that he couldn't say. So I didn't ask. I turned to comfort Wang Kuan and Wang Yongjun before hurrying after him. Outside the corridor, Zhang Canwen had already lit a cigarette and was smoking halfway. When he saw me coming over, he immediately looked up and said to me, "Zhou Yi, you should know what the life of a virgin really means, right?" I was stunned by his question. It took me a while to react before I asked him what he meant. Zhang Canwen sighed and put out the cigarette, but on the trash can next to him. Then he said, "It seems that you don't know. The life of a virgin is said to be the reincarnation of a demon, but in fact, the person with the life of a virgin can only be regarded as a channel that connects the human world and the netherworld. The demon isn't reincarnated, but uses this channel to come to the human world. When the reincarnated demon comes to the human world, it's the day the virgin dies." It was the first time I had heard of such a saying, but I immediately understood. No matter if it was Taoism or Xianmen, there was no such thing as reincarnation. Reincarnation had always been a saying of Buddhism. I don't understand the Buddhist scriptures, but from the perspective of the celestial sect, Zhang Canwen is right. Everyone's soul is independent and is restricted by the laws of heaven and earth. It is almost impossible to go against the will of heaven and earth and reincarnate. Moreover, the life of a virgin would usually die young. If it was really reincarnation and died early, wouldn't the reincarnated thing have worked hard for nothing? Thus, Jean Canwin's saying about the channel made more sense. Although I understood him, I still didn't understand what he meant. I asked suspiciously, "You mean as long as we can find a way to block the channel and prevent the reincarnated thing from coming here, we can save this child?" Jean Canwin shook his head. "Blocking the channel is one way, but it's impossible. You've seen the spec. The power of the reincarnated thing isn't something we can resist. I just want to tell you that no matter what this reincarnated thing is, it's definitely a perverted demon. If we let it pass through the channel, it will bring disaster to the human world. Thus, we must find a way to stop it." I didn't understand. If we can't block the channel, how can we stop it? After listening to me, Jean Canwin suddenly became silent. After a long time, he took out a cigarette and lit it up. After taking a deep breath, he exhaled a thick cloud of smoke and slowly said, "There's a way to stop it. It's not that difficult. As long as we kill this child, we can stop it." "What?" I was shocked and shook my head without hesitation. "No, we can't. Wang Kun brought me here to save his son, but Jean Canwin suggested to kill his son. What's going on? The child is innocent. I absolutely can't agree to this suggestion." Chapter 334. About 5 minutes later, Jean Canwin retracted his hand and opened his eyes. He turned around and ignored me. Instead, he said to Wang Kun, "I can't get rid of his virginity, but I can think of a way to let him live longer. From today onwards, he has to stay by my side. What do you think?" Wang Kun was overjoyed when he heard that. He agreed without hesitation. Then, he asked if he could visit his son in the future. Jean Canwin answered all of them. After they came to an agreement, Jean Canwin turned around and looked at the confused me. He smiled bitterly and said, "The threshold of virginity is usually between half a year old and 1.5 years old. I have a way to help him get past the threshold of half a year old. 1.5 years later, you can find a way to get rid of it, or you can help him get past the second threshold. If you can't find a way, I will still take action." Then I understood. I took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, 1.5 years. I will definitely find a way." Although I couldn't accept Jean Canwin's reckless way of killing, I actually understood what it meant to have an evil being from the nether realm. Jean Canwin had already given in, so I shouldn't push my luck. I only hoped that 1.5 years was enough for me to find a way to solve the problem. After we came to an agreement, Jean Canwin took off all the medical equipment from Wang Kun's son. Then he carefully carried him in his arms and looked at him carefully. Then he turned to ask Wang Kun, "Has the child given a name?" At that moment, Wang Kun's eyes were staring at his son. His face was filled with reluctance and heartache. There was a layer of mist in his eyes as well. When he heard that, he hurriedly blinked a few times and forced a smile as he answered, "I haven't given him a name yet. According to our customs, we wait for the child to be born before the elder gives him a name. I originally asked second uncle to give him a name, but the child encountered such a thing when he was just born. We didn't have the mood to give him a name. The second uncle he mentioned was naturally Wang Yongjun." Jean Canwin turned his head and said to Wang Yongjun, "The child will be fine in 1 or 2 years. Mr. Wang, you should think of a name." Originally, the doctor had given the child half a year. After hearing Jean Canwin's words, Wang Kun and Wang Yongjun's faces lit up. Wang Yongjun quickly nodded and pondered for a name. However, after thinking for a while, he suddenly had an idea and said to Jean Canwin, "I didn't study for many years in the past, so I can't think of a name in such a short time. However, This child will be staying by Mr. Zhang's side. Why don't Mr. Zhang help to think of a name? After all, he was an experienced old fox in the business. I believed that he had not studied for many years, but I didn't believe that he couldn't think of a name. The reason why he asked Zhang to give the name was to let Wang was so that Zhang could help. The reason that Kanwen had to him. And he would. Wang Kuan wasn't stupid. After hearing Wang Yongjun's words, he quickly smiled and asked Zhang Kanwen to give him a name. Zhang Kanwen looked at the two of them with interest. I didn't know if he saw through their thoughts. After pondering for a while, he said, "This child was born with a hard life. I hope that he can endure these hardships. Why don't we call him Wang Li?" "All right, we'll call him Wang Li." Wang Yongjun and Wang Kuan naturally didn't have any objections and immediately nodded in agreement. After giving him a name, Zhang Kanwen was about to leave with Wang Li. On the side, a thought suddenly appeared in my mind. I quickly said to Zhang Kanwen, "People with a child's life are all extremely talented in cultivation. Brother Zhang, since you want to keep him by your side, and your Winshan branch has few people, why don't you take him in as a disciple?" The reason why I had this thought was similar to Wang Yongjun's. However, other than that, I had also asked Zhang Kanwen to take little Wang Li as a disciple out of my own intentions. It's true that most children don't live long, but children with a child's talent in cultivation is extremely terrifying. It's not any worse than my 4 meridians. If little Wang Li's problem is solved in the future, he will definitely be able to take over the Wenshan branch. His future will be limitless. Zhang Kanwen naturally knew about the cultivation talent of a child. After hearing what I said, he was stunned. After staying silent for a while, he didn't directly agree. Instead, he turned to ask Wang Kuan what he thought. Wang Kuan had always yearned for the cultivation world. When he heard this news, his heart was filled with surprise. How could he reject it? He quickly agreed. Zhang Kanwen finally nodded. "The child is still too young now. When he's 3 years old, I will officially take him in as a disciple and teach him the spells of the Wenshan branch." After getting his confirmation, I finally heaved a sigh of relief. Although Zhang Kanwen was a righteous gentleman who always did what he said, the more righteous a gentleman was, the more he would consider the overall situation. To be honest, I was still a little worried. But now, with his words, unless it was absolutely necessary, he wouldn't give up on little Wang Li. After discussing everything, Zhang Kanwen brought little Wang Li back to the Feng Shui metaphysics shop with me. Since we had agreed to go to Anyang together, he would stay here for the time being and wouldn't leave for the time being. After bringing the baby back to the shop, Zhang Kanwen, Lu Chuanda, and I became nannies for the next few days. Every day, we were busy feeding and changing diapers. The 3 men were as busy as a spinning top. Fortunately, with Tong Tong's help, we didn't make any mistakes. Chapter 335. At that moment, I almost couldn't believe my ears. Children usually learn to speak around 1 year old, and Wang Li hadn't even been 2 months old, but he had actually opened his mouth to speak. That "get lost" was clear and crisp. It definitely wasn't the mumbling of a child. It was more like an emperor who had been in a high position for a long time and had been fooled by his servant, letting out a disdainful and angry shout. I definitely didn't see it wrong. The cold and disdainful expression on Wang Li's small face was very clear. This definitely wasn't something a child should show. Not only was I scared, but Zhang Kanwen, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, had a bigger reaction. He suddenly jumped up from the edge of the bed and took 2 steps back. His hand was holding a spell, and his face was full of anxiety. Seeing his actions, I reacted and quickly took out the Yin Yang Yama brush. In a panic, I even took out the silver talisman that I had used to save my life. I held it in my hand and stared at Wang Li, ready to activate it at any time. Fortunately, I didn't use the talisman in the end. Wang Li's small body stood on the bed, and his cold eyes scanned between Zhang Canwen and me a few times. Then, he lay back down and closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, the coldness and disdain in his eyes had disappeared, replaced by weakness and anxiety. He glanced at Zhang Canwen, who wasn't far from him. His small mouth pouted, and he started to cry softly. Zhang Canwen turned his head and looked at me. The panic and fear in each other's eyes dissipated a little. Zhang Canwen quickly returned to the bed and patted Wang Li's body a few times. He comforted him while carefully checking his condition. After a few minutes, Zhang Canwen let out a long sigh, and his expression relaxed. He reached out to hold Wang Li's small body and said softly, "Li, don't be afraid. It's okay. It's okay." It could be seen that although Zhang Canwen had a big beard and looked rough and fierce, his heart was actually very soft. During this period of time, he had obviously treated little Wang Li as his disciple. Little Wang Li was very well behaved. After being comforted by Zhang Canwen, his crying gradually disappeared. He looked at Zhang Canwen, and after blinking a few times, he seemed to be a little tired and slowly closed his eyes to fall asleep. It seemed that he understood Zhang Canwen's words. After little Wang Li fell asleep, Zhang Canwen quietly got up. His face turned solemn. He waved at me, and we left the room. Outside the room, Zhang Canwen had just closed the door when I hastily asked, "Big brother Zhang, just now, Wang Li, did the spirit world's demon appear from the other side of the tunnel?" Zhang Canwen nodded. After lighting a cigarette, he said in a low voice, "That's right. Although Wang Li hasn't reached the half-year mark yet, the black spot on his chest is the mark of that demonic creature. Through this mark, that demonic creature can temporarily project itself onto his body. But from the looks of it, that demonic creature shouldn't be able to unleash its power for the time being. That black spot was the mark." My heart sank. After pondering for a while, I asked, "Brother Zhang, did you succeed? Can Wang Li safely pass the half-year mark?" Hearing my question, Zhang Canwen's face darkened. He shook his head and said, "I was about to succeed, but after the demonic creature appeared, I checked Wang Li's body again. He has returned to his previous condition. It seems that the symptoms have worsened." "Worsened? Then wouldn't our efforts for the past month be in vain?" My face darkened, but I still forced myself to comfort Zhang Canwen. "Brother Zhang, don't worry. We didn't succeed this time. We can cast the spell again next time." Then my expression suddenly changed as I thought of a bad possibility. The demonic creature had most likely appeared because of Zhang Canwen's spell. If the next time Zhang Canwen cast the spell, the demonic creature would appear again, wouldn't all our previous efforts be in vain? If that's the case, how would Wang Li pass the half-year mark? Seeing the change in my expression, Zhang Canwen seemed to have guessed my thoughts. He shook his head and said, "Don't worry. The demonic creature can't use its power for the time being. It must have used up all its energy to appear. The next time we cast the spell, the demonic creature won't appear. It won't be difficult for Wang Li to pass the half-year mark." I heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, it was fine as long as he could safely pass the half-year mark. If he could pass the half-year mark, he would be safe for at least a year. 1 year later, Zhang Canwen and I might break through to the heavenly master realm. Even if we couldn't find a solution, it wouldn't be too difficult for him to pass the second barrier. However, I lifted my head and saw that Zhang Canwen didn't relax at all. His face was still terrifyingly gloomy. I didn't understand and asked hesitantly, "Brother Zhang, did you find something bad?" Zhang Kanwen was silent for a moment. He put out the cigarette in his hand, opened his mouth, and said in a very puzzled tone, "Just now, when I expelled the yin qi from his body, I found that the yin qi doesn't seem to be yin qi. Evil yin qi was not evil yin qi." I was confused by Zhang Kanwen's words. What did he mean? Without waiting for me to ask, Zhang Kanwen immediately explained, although that aura looked like yin energy on the surface, it didn't look like it. Instead, it was similar to Tao energy. There was an indescribable feeling, similar to qi of the way. How was that possible? Even if that aura was different from normal yin energy, Tao energy and yin energy were two completely opposite powers. Even if the yin energy wasn't normal, it shouldn't be similar to Tao energy. I shook my head. Brother Zhang, you must have seen wrongly. How could yin energy be similar to Tao energy? Zhang Kanwen shook his head and didn't insist on his opinion. He sighed and said, "I must have seen wrongly. All right, call Wang Kuan and the others over. Take care of Wang Li for a while. I've used up too much Tao energy in my body, so I need to rest. Wang Li's situation isn't clear yet. You should also pay attention to the situation here to prevent any accidents." He seemed to be extremely tired. After saying that, he didn't wait for my response and directly pushed open the opposite door and walked in. After he rested, I sensed Wang Li's situation. I didn't find anything wrong with him. Then I called Wang Kuan and his wife and asked them to take care of Wang Li. I returned to my room and stabilized the shaman energy in my body while diverting part of my energy to pay attention to Wang Li's situation. It was not until the next morning that Zhang Kanwen came out of his room. It seemed that his qi of the way had been completely restored. However, he did not use his qi of the way to strengthen little Wang Li's corporeity today. He just went to take a look and then returned to his room. He waited silently, looking a little strange. I wanted to ask about the situation, but today was the day that Xiao Jin was transforming, so I didn't have time to ask. I brought Xie Chunghua with me and asked him to drive me and Xiao Jin to the same place where we had transformed. Xie Chunghua knew how to drive. I guessed that it was troublesome for me to use a car these days, so he especially drove his car over for the new year. He said that it was more convenient for him to help me. That way, it was much more convenient. I didn't have to trouble Wang Kuan every time. After I returned, I hurried to check on Zhang Kanwen and Wang Li's situation, who knew that as soon as I entered the shop, I would hear arrogant laughter. I looked up and saw that the spirit snake had returned. His slender body was sitting on a chair in the middle of the lobby. He was bragging about how he had gone to the old forest in Yunnan, where he had encountered a 1,000-year-old goo insect, and how he had had an earth-shattering battle. Lu Chuanda and the little zombie were sitting in front of him. Lu Chuanda wore a flattering smile on his face as he listened to his bragging. The little zombie was looking into the distance with a dull face. He didn't react to his words at all. The spirit snake was so engrossed that he didn't notice that I had entered. Only when I used my shaman energy to pick him up and throw him to the side did the spirit snake stop talking. He opened his mouth and scolded. "Which little brat is it?" Halfway through his scolding, this fellow turned around and saw that it was me. He immediately put on a smile and said, "Io, it's you, Big Brother Zhou." I knew it. The hands that grabbed me just now were so strong, like a god. This little snake didn't even have the thought of resisting. I thought that the god from the heavens had descended. This fellow, when he started spouting nonsense, he was really bold and imaginative. I smiled at him. "Really? I just heard you say something about little brat." Before I could finish, the spirit snake shook his head and said righteously, "How could it be? How could it be? I just said, little brat." He smiled and didn't seem embarrassed at all. He pointed at himself and continued, I was talking about myself. I'm a little brat. I waved my hand in annoyance. Okay, let's talk business. Why are you back so soon? Have you found all the mushrooms? After hearing my question, the spirit snake became arrogant again. He laughed crazily. Look at me, snake immortal. Who do you think I am? I've come here personally. Is there anything I can't solve? Here, I've found all the things I need. After saying that, he shook his tail and threw out a khaki-colored cloth bag out of nowhere. A few black fungus objects leaked out of it. I resisted the urge to beat him up. I picked up the cloth bag and carefully checked. After confirming that the mushrooms were the same as the one Yen Nantian had used last time, I felt happy. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.